Right. Final subtopic for this chapter is on Newton's laws of motion. So we know that we have three types of motion. Newton's law of motion. So we have to be able to state that Newton's law of motion, and lastly apply the Newton's law of motion. Alright? So the first law of motion is often called the law of inertia. Okay, so it states that every object will continue in its state of rest or in uniform velocity as long as there is no net force acting on it. Okay, and mathematically we can we can let the total force or the net force to be equal to 0. So that is the first law of motion. Okay, the second one is it states that the acceleration of an object, so the acceleration of an object is directly proportional to the net force acting on it and is inversely proportional to the object's mass. Okay, so the direction of the acceleration is in the direction of the net force acting on the object, or in short, acceleration is proportional to force and inversely proportional to its mass. Okay, so mathematically we can write something like this, where A is the acceleration lah. Okay, it can also be written as something that you are very familiar, F equal to ma. Okay, so what Newton's second law of motion trying to say is it would take a force to change either the direction or the speed of an object. Okay, so when there is more force acting on an object, there will be a higher acceleration experienced by the object. Okay, so the same force exerted on a more massive object would cause a less acceleration lah. Yalah, sebab the higher the mass, the lower the acceleration. Okay, right. Lastly is the Newton's third law of motion. So in this third law of motion, it mentioned that whenever one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object would exert an equal force in the opposite direction on the first object lah. Okay, so this is when I mentioned when there is an action force acting on the object, there would be a reaction force from the object as well. So for example, this is force experienced by B on A, and this force will be experienced by A on B as well. Okay, equal in magnitude but in opposite direction saja. Okay, for example, we can walk forward because when one foot pushes backward, for example this one, the ground actually pushes our foot back lah. So that's why we can walk. Macam tula ako ng explanation of the action and reaction forces lah. Okay, so that is the theory part in our subtopic 4.2.